Aloha mai kākua pau. My name is Manulani Aluli Meyer, and I'm from the island of Oahu in Mokapu, Hawaii Island, in Hawaii. And I'm currently talking to you from the Aina Vela, the hotlands of Kapolei, Oahu.
Bonjour, Megoyana Kwatandigo, Bishiko Kong and Donji, Mashkade Bishike Nadodem, Anishinaabe Nagoyabe and Dao, Bishik Mate. My name is McKiver. I'm a member of Lac Seul First Nation, and I live in Sioux Lookout, which is part of my ancestors' homelands, quite close to Lac Seul First Nation. Is raised by Scoops Renato to Sioux Lookout in 2016. So it's been kind of a ongoing process for me, kind of regaining land-based knowledge. And I'm part of the Buffalo Clan.
Should we introduce ourselves too, Leanne, or?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, go ahead.
Ani Kinawaya, Giligal Vijina Denewema, Kinagachi Anishinaabe Oguming Nadonjaba, Nagojawani Megwadoda, Bidas Musa, Nidishnakas Nigachgendam, Givajayan, Given Watching Cook. It's so amazing to have both Melody and Manulani here. This has been a really amazing part of COVID for me, doing these webinars, particularly the ones on queering land-based education. And so I'm so glad that you guys are able to join us for this conversation. Miigwech.
Dansi Alex Wilson and Wasanas and Tisnigasun. Pamaskatapan Opasquac Uchinina. So I'm here in Opasquac Cree Nation on the Atigamag Lake, or Clearwater Lake as it's also known. And yeah, this has been really exciting. We do have some questions that we've asked another group of people, but we can always veer off the questions if we go down another path. So Leanne and I will just kind of take turns asking the questions, but the first one really is, what does queering Indigenous land-based education mean to you? Maybe Melody, you could start with that one.
No pressure. Yeah, I think, I don't know, I was asked to do a webinar with some some Indigenous high school students this afternoon too, talking about my work with Manoman. So it's interesting to just kind of have back-to-back land-based webinars today. But I guess a lot of what I was sharing with them is how sometimes we have to take unconventional routes to get to reclaiming our knowledge, where of course, like this best practice model is like, you are raised on the land and you've got these elders surrounding you, and the elders are just going to say like, okay, child, now it is time for you to learn. And you are 12, it is time to go get your first moose. And I think as we know for many of us that whether on reserve or off reserve, there's been so many things that have impacted our communities. In my case, 60 Scoop, mom leaving our territory when she graduated high school, and like me coming back as an adult, that throws that sort of model of like, this is something that 100 years ago I would have learned when I was 11 years old, but now I'm figuring it out when I'm 31. So I think just in terms of knowledge transmission, that's a big thing where taking those expectations and reassembling them, and like even if like finding like the value and the beauty in that too, where like again continuing on like my Manoman example, it's there aren't presently any major committed racers living even on reserve in Lac Seul. There's one family that I think spends like a day a year on the lake, and they're also deeply Christian, deeply homophobic, so I keep a very arm's length relationship from them, where I know that my access to knowledge and support would only go so far with them as well. Well, just in terms yeah, I think like in terms of like a knowledge framework, like we have to see that like the norms that are expected of us don't always work, and that doesn't make them any less valuable, because can still create structures even if they're the ones that aren't um, heteronormative or socio-normative, or however you'd want to call that. And likewise, I think what I'm seeing a lot in movements is like there's still a very patriarchal dynamic, especially where I am presently as a Treaty 3 member, living in the northern reaches of Treaty 3, but working in and with Treaty 9 communities. There's very much a cultural gap. And I think Alex could probably see pretty comparable dynamics out of northern Manitoba, with kind of like the Christianity versus tradition kind of dynamics, and how relationships work, especially in like the more remote like northern communities. And that was a big culture shock and learning curve for me. Like learning from very earnest and enthusiastic, like more urban Anishinaabe communities in southern and eastern Ontario, and then coming here and even having a frame of reference for Treaty 3 teachings, and then like flying into Treaty 9 the first time and being like, wow, there's a gospel jamboree happening. Like, and so with those like those elements of patriarchy, I guess, and in both like Christian and traditional elements, I see that a lot, where like we talk about rites of passages, and it's like, oh, like an Anishinaabe girl goes on her berry fast, and an Anishinaabe boy must like go and fast and get their moose, but as people start to interrogate that, like I think things fall apart a bit more. Like how I've seen some of the high school students that I work with here, like once one of them came in quite keen and asked myself and a coworker, and my coworker's awesome, and probably the most supportive like straight man that I've met in the area. But like he asked us about fasting, and he's like, this is like a vision quest, and like that's like what he was taught at high school. And then we had to unpack that, like a fast isn't a one-time thing, that like it can be something that you do at the onset of puberty, but like many adults of all genders will go and do that too. So I see that as like unraveling a lot of things, and like those were teachings that was like shared by like a straight cisgendered coworker of mine, who's I appreciate working with, because he's not the type of person to have heteropatriarchy in his vocabulary, but he is just very egalitarian in his approach, where if you want to go drive around and look at deer tracks, then he'll take you, no questions asked. And like for a lot of other hunters in the area, like that's not usually the case. And we see so many gender divides, and I think especially in terms of things like community and ceremonial and like more practical roles and responsibilities. As a gender non-conforming person who's consistently told, even by like the more open-minded elders in my community, like that, oh well, we just didn't have like vocabulary for two-spirit. I'm like, well, like I know the people that you go to ceremony with like say that we did, and that's just like Shoal Lake's 3 hours from here. Like we would have been in contact with each other historically too. Like there's a lot of those dynamics to continue to unpack. And I think something that I also continuously wrestling with is like that sort of pre-contact romanticism of like, yes, we know that there are queer and two-spirit people that we have records of historically in like 19th century Anishinaabe communities, but so many other things in our society have changed that like, why can't we revisit ourselves within a modern day lens and say like, look at how many youth there are that are exploding right now, that are screaming to be recognized in a different manner, and like what are we doing to not acknowledge that. And I think finally, because I'm just thinking like surveying across like and working in the Sioux Lookout region, like Sioux Lookout's a small town of 5,000, but we service over 35 other First Nations that are remote access. It's called the Hub of the North, and it's a population of 40,000, mostly Ojibwe people coming through this small town hub. And a lot of my work is as a support worker for the high school students that live in boarding homes and at a boarding school, which is a former residential school during the school year. So that's why I think I have like a wider snapshot of youth from a lot of different communities that are living quite intimately, that I've been hired to support them too. But having an access of like a larger regional snapshot of what that is. There's things like Choose Life is a big program that's servicing Northern Ontario right now, and it's in response to a First Nations youth suicide crisis that's been ongoing for the past couple of decades. And community feedback has largely been like, what we need is to get people on the land. Part is a land-based program. My own job is funded by Choose Life funding, and it functions a little bit differently than how it typically targets on reserve communities. But when I look across all the different Choose Life workers in the North, like they're all men. I can think of very few women that actually are engaging or teaching, and most of it's kind of like hunting guides. Like these are workers that are paid to take students out on hunting trips, on fishing trips. Plant-based medicines is definitely shunned a little bit more in the northern communities. Like it's very much like a strong like hunting and fishing focus. And probably from what I see when I'm reaching out to different communities, like 95% like male workers, and I don't even need to really qualify that as straight, because it's these are communities where it's very difficult to be out in community or to name that. I work with a lot of queer youth. It's harder for me to point to queer adults over the age of 30 or 35, and like they probably either left the community or died. I think actually like the last two spirit elder I know working in this region passed about a year ago. Bit of a tangent, but it's the dynamic of like, I think if we're across the board naming like what youth need is the land, and having like this really gendered dynamic in terms of education and access being very much oriented towards straight men, it's leaving out a lot. Because at the same time, when I go and visit these northern communities, and if there's like a community fish fry or something, like you're going to see like all of these Oja Cree grandmas like pushing away their walkers and picking up a fillet knife and like being extremely proficient in their land-based skills. And like, you know, that land-based knowledge isn't as gendered as it somehow is structured to be. So in like the educational capacity, like how are we replicating patriarchy in such like strict dynamics? Yeah, so that's it for this opening statement.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Manu, do you want to jump in there?
Well, mahalo nui, Melody. That was fabulous. I learned a lot.
Oh, thank you.
I loved it. I so appreciate it, because querying land-based education is, I don't know, it's repetitiously redundant in my book. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It's so repetitious, especially here in Hawaii, because anytime we're on land, and all you got to do is look at what I've done in the last week and with who I've done it with. Just this morning, 10 minutes ago, Ka'ulunani Council, the urban forest gang. It's all women, and we are committed. And so the nature of these times, and the fact that you've asked me to talk in this way, I've never really been focused on it before, but we are in the change right now. And, you know, of course, the gender is on the continuum, but the priority has been prophesized by my people. The priority of the rise of Papa Tuanuku, of Papa Hulilani, of Papa Hanau Moku. There are hundreds of names for our deities and our energies of land, of water. We have names for the feminine sides of water, and we have masculine names, and that genderizing of even the elements is part of our culture. But how we are on land, absolutely key to queer it up. I think it's a synonym for waking up and finding the balance of the world. So I appreciate just this past Friday and Saturday, Pula Makolier, a beloved friend, 6'2" surfer, Olelo Hawaii teacher, came from the island of Maui. we believe even from the island of Maui, from the Kiha Wahine lines are coming to be of service. The Kiha, of course, is our feminine lines of the Mo'o deities, of our large reptiles, from the Muliwai, from our freshwater and saltwater. We absolutely believe this, gang, and that she came to discuss two major differences. One in our community in Makaha, she came to talk about aloha he'enalu, the idea that surfing is a spiritual act, and those who surf have developed a pristine evolutionary sense of spiritual connection. And 40 people came, and they were all women. So how's that? You know what I mean? And so she brought the mo'okuauhau, the history of how we surfed, and the best surfers in our history were always women. And so there it goes. You know, they in the 60s they thought, oh wow, can women, you know, in the colonized Hawaii, can women surf? And you know what I mean? So we have always surfed without skegs, by the way, for thousands of years. The Kawa continuum, the idea that that time, how we view time when we are on land, how we engage in time, is absolutely shaped by our modern ways or shaped by ancient ways. And so Pulama opened up the Kawa continuum, the idea that time isn't a natural idea. It's it's a contrived idea, and the continuity of the world is based on seasons. And these seasons are they're long spaces of time. And she was able to produce that understanding with 40 people again at a session. So what we're doing now in webinars, what we're doing now in unusual settings, is actually laying a very clear philosophical foundation, and kumupa'a we call it, to really pry open all those things that Melody's absolutely describing, and Alex and Leanne, you describe in your work. But now we just got to be clear. And so the things that what we like, for instance, just yesterday I was asked to do another I Ching workshop for CEOs, for nonprofits. Now the I Ching, if you've ever done the I Ching, it is a land-based on eight natural elements, and it's 5,000 years old, and you bet it helps. So the feminine, the rise of Mareikura, of Hina, these are old processes that we are practicing every time we meet people, because Hawaiian style, when you come over to my house, you got to kahea in. That's good manners. So you have to know the names of the places, and if they're named in English, they're always an older name. And that ability to be interested in older names, to me, is querying up land-based education. The interest in other things besides what is given to us in this contemporary times, that interest is a nurturing one for all of us, because it goes beyond just developing our identity. It helps us heal. And when you heal, and when we can heal with each other, and when we can actually name in spirit the touch of the snow that you folks have. I mean, Alex, I know the beauty outside your window. It thrills me that you're there, because I know that type of nourishment. So that idea of nourishment on land is not simply about function, accumulation, feeding. Those are very vital. It is about relationality. It is about love. So we sing our songs. Just yesterday too, Indrajit, my good friend, sang a song of love to this coconut tree that was suffering. We are in a coconut, we are in a vibrational switch now. We are planting coconuts everywhere. And he found a coconut grove on the Ewa shoreline with about 60 coconuts that were old. They're over 100 years old, so they're very old. But he found one that is alive. And so he's watering it every week and singing to it. And so that is querying up land education. When you actually have a relationship with land that is not about extraction, about rape, about pillage, about taking, having a relationship with our beloved Aina Aloha. We've developed, friends have developed a new evolutionary way of looking at economics, and they're calling it Aina Aloha. And Aina Aloha means the land that has always loved us. And so even that view is, to me, querying up this whole topic of what a relationship with land is and what it can be when we're awakened to the process of nourishment. And at the center of that for us in Hawaii is our Ike Kupuna, our knowledge through our ancestors, our Ike Aina, the knowledge when you kilo, first science kilo, and then our knowledge of Ike Pono, which is at the center of truth, is love, is aloha. So we chant songs of aloha, we feed each other, and even that begins something different for our youth. And we have to really ritualize it, because it's not just a cognitive accumulation of information. We ritualize our times on land with different things in school. It's not school, it's education. And we know the difference. And that's what it means to queer land-based education to me, ladies. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Awesome. I have a question for Manulani, and then I have a question for you as well, Melody. Manu, I was speaking on Zoom with Doug Williams, who you know, and when you came to our territory, to Michi-Sagi Anishinaabe territory, we took you ice fishing, and it was very cold. And he says hello. We were talking about the pandemic. We were talking about COVID-19, and he used the word oxywin, the big sickness. And I was asking him about how Anishinaabe people dealt with pandemics and epidemics in the past. And he was speaking about how physically distancing, moving to the north of our territory, was one of the ways that we dealt with that. He talked about how there was an intensification of well-being and of taking care of each other. So he said that we focused a lot on eating fish. We focused a lot on medicines that would strengthen our immune systems. We focused a lot on ceremony. We focused a lot on trusting that the land, that Anishinaabe land, would bring back balance, a cure for the sickness. And in order to find that, he talked about our healers and our medicine people actually having a closening relationship with the land as they're trying to figure out which combinations of medicines would be good for the people. And so what is this time that we're in? What is the land trying to teach us? What are our ancestors trying to teach us? What is this waking up that we're in the midst of? Because there's a lot of noise as states and governments are trying to manage this. But what does this mean for your people?
Mahalo nui for that question. I've been asked that almost every day, and we give conversations and webinars on it. The impact of COVID-19 and the pandemic on our Hawaiian people is profound. When people say we haven't experienced this before, they are completely incorrect. We have lost close to 80% of our people in the last pandemics. In the 1800s, 1830s, 1859, 1802, we had close to 1 million people here in 1778. And 100 years later, we had 56,000. So we've had to adjust, and in that sorrow, my friend Pulamo is calling it the aukupa, the time of steadfast knowledge that went underground, and that underground knowledge was saved. We have practitioners now in all sorts of fields. Lomi Lomi, which is our massage, La'au Lapa'au, our healing with plants, Ho'oponopono, our healing through ritualized discussion. There's actually a surge in this. right now. People like the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, OHA, is putting money to our local farmers, and the CSA boxes, our community-supported agriculture, has gone from 60 to 250. That's a lot. Over in Waianae, our Ma'o Farms gang is being, and they've not missed a step during this pandemic, and their internships have actually risen. So people are more interested in aipono and the process of good eating. People are more interested in a healer in every home. Our kupuna are actually asking to develop a healer in every home. We had healers in every home. And so just the ability to be interested to plant momaki. What does momaki mean? What does ko'oko'olau mean? What do these things mean? What does la'au kahi mean? So these interests are being stimulated by the kaumaha of these times, the sorrow, and the lack of fiscal agency because of our tourist priorities. And so the development of our own acumen through our own practices is what is happening now, Leanne. It is actually, I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful. I'm a part of a group of people that practice these things daily, and it's not dipped. It's actually amplified. We are playing our games more. We've got a group of people from Uluwa'e playing their games. You know what I mean? I mean, they give the boxes. Kamehameha is subsidizing these big boxes full of Hawaiian games. Konane, it's the only one I know right now. But you know, they've got the marble games that they call a certain way. And so in this sense of fracas, we're finding a sense of balance. And you know, this pandemic has been described as non-specific amplification. You know what I mean? Like, where is it going? It's like a bad trip. You know, where is it? Where did it start? Where is it going? You know, we've got climate change, food insecurity, pollution, homelessness. All these things are affecting us now. And the people that I hang with, the people, and we're talking hundreds and thousands of us, are actually focusing on the opposite of non-specific amplification, and that is effulgent coherence, or I call it unfurling awareness. And you know, if we don't use this time as an unfolding sense of awareness, we're going to miss the opportunity that conflict serves up to us, because our kupuna always had something to say about conflict. It is the absolute core of our stimulation for the concepts of aloha. Ulua e kevelina a ke aloha. Loving is the practice of an awake mind. Like, I love that. We do. We're the aloha guys over here. And you know, against all odds, people are feeding each other every day. The Kupu gang is giving 500 meals. So we're using this pandemic as an opportunity to wake up.
Holy, we got to get busy in Anishinaabe territory. Hey, Melody. Miigwech for that, Manulani. Melody, I think I wanted to talk to you a little bit, kind of Anishinaabe to Anishinaabe, because I know that you have moved to the north and to the west of our territory, which is quite different from the part of the territory that you grew up in and where I live. And you've been one of those people that I think over the past 10 years has just single-handedly queered Anishinaabe everything. And I found in your opening statement this tremendous expression of humility, because when I think of you and your partner, one minute you're out in a canoe harvesting manomen, and then you're with the beavers, and then you're doing birch bark stuff, and there's quills that you got off the side of the highway. And then when I see you as a performer move into white space as an Anishinaabe person, you bring that land. I'm thinking of when you were performing with Elenisa Bobswin, you brought that bush onto that stage, and I could feel that presence. And that was a really, really beautiful thing. And I think that moving to this northern part of the territory where queer youth do not have the resources that we have in the South, do not have the supports, do not have the mentorship, are in communities where I'm hearing you say have very intensive kind of Christianity. There's a lot of white supremacy in the non-Anishinaabe communities. There's a lot of patriarchy, and still you're just queering away. So I'm wondering, what is it where in the South, where we've been able to take, certain groups of people have been able to take sweat lodges, or we've been able to take ceremonies and pipe ceremonies, and we've been able to make them safer spaces for queer youth. What kind of supports, what do you need to do that work in Earth? If I was the king of the world, what would you need from us in order to, and I think in a really, we're saving Anishinaabe brilliance, because the situation, I think, in a lot of these communities is so dire for Two-Spirit and queer youth that they're not making it into adulthood. And that we lose that brilliance, we lose that relationality, we lose that network. So what is it? What are the things that would make your work easier and would make you feel more supported, and then in turn you able to support more of those youth?
That's a good question. We do get that question fairly frequently, because I think, having spent years in the South, or at least in urban communities, Aaron's a Prairie kid, mostly from Edmonton, so I would call that South, but urban centers, we have more visibility, and like we have stronger networks outside of this immediate town. So like working with kids from the northern communities that I work with, like for them, like Sioux Lookout is the big city, and like when they're like the reserves around them that they have to get to by float plane. Sioux Lookout, Thunder Bay, Winnipeg if you're feeling fancy. And so like I remind myself just how privileged I am to have access to these international networks where I can be having that. Like I'm sitting here with like Maori art on my shoulder, and like, it's definitely a lot of privilege that I still carry in like this like strange racist little town. And more and more like people have been reaching out like, hey, like here's this funding opportunity, or like, oh, can we give you some funds like to support these youth? And like sometimes we say yes and sometimes we say no, and because like money actually isn't fixing it either. I think often I say like, can I clone myself 4 times over so I can just do this work a little bit more efficiently? I think we need more hands on deck more than we actually need funds. I mean, like I've had like, it's like the daily heartbreak that I see like working with youth in these communities where, and I kind of have to start from scratch. This will be my 3rd year working in my current position where I am a high school support worker, and it's usually like the kids, by the time they're 18, 19, like in grade 12, like start to have that trust and open up to you a bit more. It takes almost a full school year to build that relationship. And right now we're like, how do we keep engaging them? And well, they went home before March break and we haven't seen them since. And usually it's after March break that they finally decide to trust you. So we're trying to reach out and support these people that haven't had enough time with us yet to really have those relationships established. But definitely what I see is like, I'm sure I break a half a dozen social work rules every day, but we all know what a flawed disciplined social work is. Is too. And like I add most of the queer youth on my Facebook, so it's I know that they're kind of getting a little snapshot too. And like usually like I'm waiting for like I accept ads, like I'm not trying to be a creeper and like go and chase them down. Sometimes I do if it's like someone on my reserve that I'm a little bit more worried about, but what I see from like those social media connections is how much all the queer youth in the region, like they're already plugged into each other. They have like these support networks already, and as someone that's in my 30s now, I'm like, I don't want to be interfering with teenager business so much, but I also desperately want to adopt all of these adorable little kids. Like, and like, there's a lot of dynamics. As I remember, like, some of the realities that these high school students deal with is if one of them starts struggling, and often like it's mental health or addictions related, and I'd say like 9 times out of 10, if a kid gets in trouble sufficiently and frequently enough, it's a bit of a 3-strike rule policy. Like, you get caught drinking 3 times in a school year, and then you are expelled and sent home for the rest of the school year. So when they ask us why our rates of high school completion are so low, it's like, well, the white kids in town are drinking every weekend and they get to finish and graduate on time. But if the native kids start drinking, then they ultimately get sent home and stigmatized, and like are just disciplined so frequently that that really impacts their well-being. One of like the students that I saw, I was like, was visibly struggling, and we could only do so much within our capacity as adults with like employment frameworks that say you can only do X, Y, and Z, and like now this repercussion is kicking in, and like I was being told like you're not even allowed to be alone in the building with this kid because he's a boy, and like therefore like they were implying like that like a young gay teenager was like inherently at risk of like sexually assaulting me because he had like mental health issues. I'm like, actually, I think I have a better relationship with this kid than that, and if he just needs to be in a safe space and I just need to be on site so that he can have a nap and be undisturbed, like those things. But after this youth was ultimately sent home, one of the other students I was close with was like, I'm so upset because he was the only person that I was like, he was one of the first people I came out to. He was the only ones that really understood where I was coming from and was able to support me through kind of processing my gender and sexual identity. And so I know that I fulfill that capacity to a certain extent with the youth. Like I'll walk into the airport and I'll see a group of teenagers hanging out, and then one of the like the young trans boys, like I see like kind of whispering and then pointing at me, and I'm like, I saw all that, kid. Like you are saying something, but because I think the youth have seen me as one of the adults that's trying not to demonize them and will leverage resources. Like people will send me up things like binders once in a while, but it's like to get to the trans youth that don't have access to it. But it puts a lot of back-end admin work. Like I'm clocking like the 35 hours of social work, and then anytime some funds gets in, then I'm reaching out to every teenager and crowdsourcing, and then organizing all the logistics to get whatever support materials they need. And it always feels like you're just like using like a little bail bucket to try and rescue a sinking ship. And I see a lot of hope too, where some of the other queer youth in town right now, and there's definitely class differences too. Like I think class isn't discussed enough in conjunction with queer Indigenous communities, where even on reserve, like one kid who both parents are on chief and council and they have like a pretty middle class lifestyle, even if they're in a fly-in reserve, like, and that youth seems like was able to come out at 14 and be relatively supported and have nice clothes. And then like the queer youth that's in foster care or has like a pastor for a dad, like is living very differently than the middle class, like more progressive parents. Like there's so many variables across the board. And so Indigenous youth in town with like off-reserve middle class working parents like are taking up more activism kind of responsibilities, like doing like some Black Indigenous solidarity work, which is super exciting for a town of like 4,000, like where we have like a very small Black community too. But I don't know, like I try to, like I've been hurt a lot here, and I've been trying to learn on how to target that hurt and anger in more productive ways. There's definitely like there's white supremacy within the queer organizing in town too, and I've tried to tackle that head on, and then it just results in too much persecution afterwards. Like, you have to live with these people, and if you just alienate like half the nurses in town, like, it doesn't make it safe to go to the hospital anymore. But I think that's been a lesson too, and like learning like where to step in and when you can support a teenager, when you need to just kind of work behind the scenes to give them the space to do so. There's been as many losses as there have victories, but definitely what I see is like the youth feel really validated when I see like I see you for your queerness, and I'm also acknowledging that you're experiencing racism, because there, as Northern Ontario catches up finally to things like pride parades, like definitely like white supremacy rears its head pretty quickly, and like, I'm still learning how to deal with more patience and humility around navigating the Christian dynamics, because certainly like I've experienced homophobia from traditional Anishinaabe people as well. But when I talk about Christianity, and I mean, I was also raised in the United Church. My mom is still fairly hybridized, like goes to church most Sundays, more as a pianist than as like a devout Christian. But like I was raised with a relatively progressive Christian framework where like the United Church, it was like the first to affirm gay clergy and like have gay marriage within the church. Like, it was a more progressive space than what I see here, which is like hardline Pentecostals, where like people are still saying like, no, like this is witchcraft. Like, I hear witchcraft as a phrase on like a weekly basis working in this region. Like, there's a lot of 19th century moralizing. Like, it almost feels like going backwards in time. And as I put on my critical academic hat, I know that's also alienating, because this is a region where a high school diploma is an accomplishment. And like, my master's degree isn't valued here, and I don't necessarily think it should be, but after all the pain I went through to get it, it's still a bit of a blow to the ego. And it's difficult too, because as much as racism is a factor, like, it's how much we paternalize that too, because like a lot of the trauma that queer youth are experiencing comes from within their own communities. And I'm still as much an insider as an outsider. It's someone that speaks with an Ottawa accent and has a graduate degree and has only lived here 5 years. Like, I'm not always the person that can address that. So it's always thinking like I think ultimately the answer to your question is like, we need more hands on deck locally. And like some of my coworkers that are straight but younger and progressive, and like, you know what, like don't put this in like the webinar afterwards, but 2 of my older coworkers who are both Ojibwe ultimately either filed HR complaints to me because I put up an Anishinaabe ASCII pride flag in the office. And that's because upwards of 40% of the students, and not all these kids will come out to me, but they'll come out to some of the youth that I work with that will then share that back with me. In like a cohort of about 40 high school students, like 4 out of 10 are going to be LGBT identified. So these northern communities are really rapidly shifting, and like the youth are moving forwards as the church is moving backwards. And this year is the first year that I haven't seen floods of, like, usually you go to the Sioux Lookout airport in the summer and half the vehicles there are going to have American license plates with stickers from Pentecostal American churches that come up and throw Bible camps in the northern communities all summer. So there's extremely heavy missionary work happening, and the communities are internalizing this, they are welcoming this. And at the same time, like, we definitely see more transmasculine than more transfeminine youth on our radars. I've come across the names, like just been told like there is a trans woman in this community, and I see them living in like express states of fear. Like, we know that trans women face high rates of violence. And I remember as a trans woman, Yamatong, like I was told that she will not leave the house before dark, and then she will only go into a vehicle with close friends like after 11 o'clock at night, and then drive around the community just to have some sort of engagement, and then is completely housebound the rest of the day, which is not demonizing this community. Like, in terms of LGBT community, there's like so many variables, like the students at Pelican Falls High School, which is a historic residential school, which now functions as a boarding school run by the First Nations for high school students. Like gay boys. One of my students actually came out a month after graduating, so that's quite a thing, like to be closeted until the second year out of that school and then to come out. Queer women are a little bit more tolerated for various reasons in these dynamics. But at Sioux North, which is like the public school where students live in boarding homes, I'd say it's definitely like quite a bit of diverse sexuality, quite a few transmasculine students. But just thinking back to my own high school experiences in the early 2000s in suburban Ottawa, like it was a pretty scary and precarious time. Nothing like what I see here, but in my graduating year, like any queer students I had in my peer group, like we came out in like the final 3 months of grade 12 or after graduating. But to see so many on reserve youth that are coming out at 13, 14 now and like living their identity gives me a lot of hope too. Black School this year flew the pride flag through the month of June for the first time, and Chief and Council supported it. But then a really prominent family who are pastors with like connections to Pentecostal Saskatchewan churches wrote a 10,000 word diatribe afterwards, which really split the community in half. And like the church still holds that power. And Lac Seul is a bit more of a transitional one where we have traditional people, we have religious people who are driving the community, but have many of those same northern religious influences. But I don't know. I could for a while, but if I had an easy answer, I'd be doing it.
I think that part of the way that we're seeing it is that queering is a way to not only understand the theory, but also the practice, and queering the land-based practices or queering land-based education in itself, like you're doing, is really potentially transformative for the community. And I'm wondering, you talked about some of the tradition and the traditional people being a little more conservative as well. And, that's another thing that's happening across the land. I'm wondering what advice you would have for other people or teachers so that land-based education isn't just kind of replicating the same colonial structures, but now outside,
I think some of the hard lessons that I've had to learn was, I think queer people need to be present in these spaces for them to start to change, but it's going to hurt. And our ceremonial spaces are not going to be perfect overnight, but it's with our ongoing presence that I think it can start to change. And that's not going to be safe for all people. When I initiated in the Midday Lodge in my community, like it was like I almost quit multiple times because and by this point I was just like so sick of arguing about skirts, and I just did not want to make an issue of it. So I'm like, I'm just going to show up here without apology, without a skirt. And ultimately the ceremony leader like started making it an issue. And a certain point where eventually I'm like, he started telling my family members, like the other people, like, do not accept any more tobacco from Melody until they put on a skirt. And I had tried having like multiple discussions with him like months in advance, and like I could tell like he was like trying to explain it's like you also have to remind yourself, like, you're talking with a 70-year-old residential school survivor. Like, they've internalized a lot over the years. It doesn't mean that they're disposable, but like catching up with 21st century gender politics is not something that's going to happen in a day. But is it going to be extremely painful, like, to be the one to force that change? And like he made it an issue to the point where I couldn't progress any further in ceremony, and I had to either quit or put the skirt on. And I was about to leave, and then like 5 women from my community said, like, no, like, this is your community too, like, you need to be here. and like they chopped up her ribbon skirt, like made some sort of compromise, and I still hated the damn thing. And I might have yelled at the elder a couple of times. It wasn't my finest moment, but it's like, and I think I only had the capacity to do that because I knew that there was another like 17-year-old trans youth that was trying to go through the ceremony and left before I did. And it was that kid's mother that asked me for help. And I ended up finishing the initiating, and after that first year of being an initiate, like the next year I came back, I'm like, I'm still not wearing a skirt, and like he just didn't force the issue anymore. So I don't know if he made his peace in between or if it was just like the strange power dynamics that happen in ceremony. But I think it was important for me too to like go through that, because I see so many things that like something less than perfect happens at a ceremony and immediately it goes to Facebook, and there's blog wars, and there's Twitter subtweets, and meanwhile the people making these decisions are a couple of elders that have a flip phone, if anything. And like having the capacity to like, it's like it's trying to have that humility of like the people that are implementing these policies, like to be trauma informed, like extends both ways. Like these elders are also traumatized. I have to keep my own arrogance in check, and I'm like, okay, I probably don't know better than the elder, but reminding like I also know myself better than this elder does, and trying to just hold that space. And I think what keeps me going is like is just knowing how many teenagers there are in this community. And that's something like, for as much like queer Indigenous space is like so dominated in like the wider discourse as being like a very urban thing, where mostly coming out of Toronto, like I think like the beauty of working in Sioux Lookout too is like walking into a room where it's majority First Nations youth and like 40% of them are queer and have like never even been to Toronto. Like I think there's a certain power into that too, and it's a reminder that our community is much bigger than what the intelligentsia Facebook Twitter discourse is going to be. But it's like queer people need to be present, and like sometimes we get hurt along the way, but I think there still needs to be the capacity to push for change in a respectful manner and try and find some common ground.
Thank you for that. Manu, do you want to add?
I'll just jump in for a second. Melody, miigwech for sharing that. I'm so sorry that happened to you, and that's how oftentimes the Mede operates, and that's oftentimes how our ceremonial communities operate. And you should have been allowed to be initiated in all of your glory, wearing whatever you wanted. But I also have mad respect for you being so clear over and over and over again throughout that process, and teaching that elder, the residential school survivor, over and over and over again, and not just that person, but everybody who was there witnessing. And I have just so much respect for you for the sacrifice that you had to make in order to complete that. So that is an amazing story of queering land-based education, and thank you for sharing it. And I'm sorry that our nation couldn't do better.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, Melody, listening to your story brings back, my own community in Hawaii. We are completely Christianized. We couldn't even say we couldn't really talk to our elders that we are in our DNA. We had to talk to God, Keakua. And I've actually lost count of over 20 beloveds, family, friends, community that have killed themselves over these kind of issues. And, there by the grace of, of everything is go I. So I so get what you've gone through. And querying land-based education means standing and saying that idea does not include the fullness of who I am. And this keeping steady is really a gift you give those that go beyond you, that come through you. And I think, I'm 61 years old. It's like I've got a whole list of those broken-hearted experiences that I just all of a sudden I remembered when you spoke about that one, not wearing, you got to wear a skirt. Oh my God, that is so present. And over here, that in philosophical terms is called a form of, for me, a form of uniformity. And so I remember giving a talk in Aotearoa, and there was, 3,000 people, and this person comes up, this Hawaiian comes up and said, "Oh, Manu, you've got your kihei on the wrong shoulder." We wear the ceremonial gear. And I wear my shoulder, wear it on the left. And she said, "Oh no, you got to wear it on the right." Because we all are. I'm like, oh my God. I said, and I'm so glad to have that. Or else I would have felt lost. I think that's what the thing is for me. When you know who you are, even when this well-intentioned colleague wanted to fix me, so that I can be like everybody else. No, you got to know, why are you doing what you're doing? Oyavale. And so I said that proverb for us means not all knowledge is taught in one school. These kind of insights we use with our youth and our adults on land. And that's how I healed. You know what I mean? Through our kupuna before Christian contact, our elders before assimilation, our values before capitalism. The concept for wealth for us is vai. It means to flow. It doesn't mean to stack up. So even value systems, you remind me of all the times, all of them, we've had to make a decision to say, no, we're going to do this first. And it always messes people's minds. You know what I mean? They always go, oh no, we got to do this. I'm like, wow, but why? So when we're clear, when I've been clear, thanks to the people that have taught and continue to teach me, it's really been a healing, because I'm a recovering Catholic for sure. Recovering. I wanted to be a priest, but Mom said, no, you cannot. You got to be a nun. I'm like, no way. No way. No, nuns have no power. So, yeah, that was a good one, Melody. I appreciate your sharing. And we have the same in Hawaii, but I have to say, this generation is very, very. I feel like there's been a change. We have on the spectrum that are our politicians now. We have mahus in Hawaii that are famous singers, kumuhulas, are transgender men are very highly respected here. The women are that's a new phenomenon for us, the transgendered women. I don't know really how I'm articulating it, but it's really happening in Hawaii. And we're a lot more Americanized than in Canada, but we are at the heart of Hawaii, and of Americanized Hawaii is our spiritual base of Kanaka Makua, which is our Kanaka, which is our Hawaiian structure, and it still maintains that being mahu, being transgendered, is called our word is aikane. Our word is for that for people like me, is the concept of we are beloved advisors, we are beloved friends, but we have the two spirits in us. And we have a different process in our life, and that saved my life, is to understand what that was. And when you get that teaching, then you're able to pass it on. And so I've been able to pass it on to our queer youth, and that is, you got to know something and pass and keep our ike aina ike kupuna strong. Pass something on. If it's rituals of moose collection, if it's understanding the water and the rituals of water, anything. But we've been asked to keep one thing, and then in 20 years make sure that people can come to you for that knowledge. So that saved my life. That saved my life, and that for me helped me focus on the priority of cultural continuity as a synonym for land-based education. We survive and we thrive when we can develop a relationship with our land-based and water-based knowledge, and therefore our people, because we are from that and we are that. So thank you for that, Melody. I love learning and relearning about my own sorrows.
Leanne, do you have anything else you want to bring up?
Trying to put myself back together here.
Yeah, I think we all have experiences like this, and it's an honor to be with both of you, well, all three of you, and that you're so honest and able to share these experiences, because it can really start being like an inventory of homophobic acts, sexism, misogyny, racism, and all that. But really, I like what you said about that continuity of culture and continuity of energy. And for me, that links right back to our cosmology. And I love it when, when we're able to make those, even if it's a small connection to something that happened along, that's part of our long story of how we came to be human. And so I'm always looking for those in different cultures and, different Indigenous cultures, looking for the way that people can just exist and be yourself, but also ways that we can kind of queer the story along the way by standing up like Melody has and continues to, and Leanne in your writing and the work you do, and Manu as well. So it's inspirational. Thank you.
It reminds, when Melody was talking, it was reminding me of what you were saying, Manulani, that loving is the practice of an awake mind, and Melody's mind is awake, and that strength that she has is loving our people and loving the land. And I wanted to know if you could talk more about this idea of conflict, and the idea that conflict is an opportunity. It's a stimulation, I think you said, and it's an opportunity to kind of cultivate an unfolding awareness and that practice of love.
Yep. Absolutely. We believe in the concept of simultaneity. It gets expressed as aloha aku, aloha mai, kokua aku, kokua mai, a'o aku, a'o mai, ike aku, ike mai. Meaning, believe it or not, this is why I'm healing with these kind of concepts. As you sow, so shall you reap. So Jesus was his name, Christ was his awakened state. So, the healing of even those ideas helps me have a more resounding impact. And so, meaning it's not about love, it's about loving, that verbing of what consciousness means. Because if you do not use conflict to awaken, then all you're going to have is conflict. And so I appreciate the idea that consciousness actually is stimulated, is amplified, is awakened through conflict. And so, you know, I always make the fun, like, hey, us Hawaiians, us Kanaks, we awake. We got to be awake. Because if not, we're just going to be smashing each other. You know what I mean? And just continually thinking that's a higher frequency of where the mo'o lives, where continuity lives. It isn't. We just think it is. It isn't. And that's why when Melody speaks about, even when there's a kupuna that's just putting her down, she remembers that he's a product of a broken system. And so his heart is broken. But, you know, she didn't come. I don't think you came to that, Melody, just, you know, like in a second. You that was hard wrought. That was worked on. That was explored. That was written about. I'm sure of it. Because conflict is like water and we are rocks. So, you know, tick, 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 water shapes stone. All of our valleys are made through the water. So this is what I love about conflict, and the concept of simultaneity in it, meaning you will give, you will get what you give. That's why whenever people talk about something about negative, I always say to them, wow, I didn't know you thought that about yourself. And they always like, what? Like, shut up. I'm like, no, think about it. And then, you know, then they go away and they go, wow, that's what I needed to work on. I do that every day when I do mistakes. I'm like, wow, what did I just say? So that is from our kupuna, you guys. Our elders teach us that mukuaha, you know, ika ololo ola, ika ololo make. There is life in language, there is death in languaging. So what does that teach me? That does teach me how to behave. And most of our proverbs, our ololo no ea, really do instruct us on how to forgive. Ho'okahila'au he mihi. That's one of my favorite proverbs. The first medicine is forgiveness. Ho'okahila'au he mihi. And so over and over and over, it's water on my rock character of, you know, resistance, anger, you know, aggression, water. You just keep doing. Ulua e kevelina a kealoha. Ho'okahila'au he mihi. These are proverbs that just keep shaping my nature. And the best ones, Leanne, and have been about aloha. And so aloha is our true intelligence. That's what we discovered in Hawaiian epistemology. I'm like, wow, that just changed my life. I don't feel so stupid no more. You know what I mean? And it really is. If you really tune in to the potency of aloha, it is not our highest value. It is the primal source of all our values. And it's not a fake thing either. So that's what I'm learning. And that conflict is the only thing that stimulates it. So I tell my students, my job is to put you in places of discomfort safely. That's my job. Hello, did I do it? You know, I mean, are there enough mosquitoes around you so that you feel absolutely irritated? Yay, yay, yay. What are you going to do about it? You going to still cook dinner? Is it going to be bad? What? So, you know, the thing is, we throw humor at a lot of this stuff, because if we don't, it's just going to be, you know, one big bloodbath of sorrow. And we are committed to waking up at this time and to being a force of love in the world. And that's why aloha is the primal source of our collective emergence. I am committed to that idea. It really is. And I learned that through conflict. And I learned that because my twin sister is completely beautiful, but she's completely opposite of me. And if you don't really begin to appreciate and be mentored now, that's a real spiritual idea, by what is opposite from you, then what I'm doing is just neo-colonizing everybody with my good intentions. And that's humbled me the most. But you got to know my twin sister, Moana, to know how special she is. So thank you for that question, Mia.
Melody, do you have anything that you would like to add to the conversation? Or would you like me to fire a question at you?
Sure. Hit me with another question.
Well, when I'm listening to Manu and Alex, and Manu talk about loving as a practice, I want to ask you, as an Anishinaabe relation, if we're doing a good job of that practice amongst ourselves, within our community, within the communities inside of our communities. Because I think since the pandemic and before the pandemic, I think that what I'm seeing in our nation is people feeling very stressed, and mental health issues are amplified because those supports are less. We're isolated. There's more hardship now, and I worry that some of that stress is being taken out on intimate partners, on families, online, and causing harm in our communities. So what are your thoughts on this practice of loving and having an awake mind within inside our culture? Do you wish I didn't ask you that question now? You can just disregard it and answer something else.
Yeah. No, because it's like, I think it's easy to sit and in like a common collective moment, like think like these are my values and I'm all about lateral love, and then you can, I'm like, I've been messy, my partner's been messy, like you go on native Twitter on any given day and there's going to be some dumpster fire raging somewhere, um and then like when I come out of these urban circles and then like say, okay, like it's nice not to deal with celebrity culture, what's happening on the res, I'm like, oh, that's also messy. So like I think love is something that we still need to aspire to. Like it come like it shows itself in different ways, but definitely I think we're seeing a lot of hurt flying around in communities, and it's amplified. It was all present before, but I think COVID is just exposing a lot of things and kind of amplifying existing dynamics where, and yeah, it's like something that like now that my partner and I are in our 30s, it's like, wow, we've really spent like 10 years sitting on Twitter like telling people why they were dumbasses. Like, was that the best use of our time? And then I go and like flip and refresh Twitter and see what's happening over there. So I'm getting a little bit better as I get older to identify these dynamics. Can I still fully extract myself from these processes? Not entirely. But I think it's like reminding ourselves to like to be trauma informed is to remember that like we have trauma since 1492. So it's it's it doesn't fully undo itself in a generation either. And like it's funny now that I'm in my 30s and working with a lot of teenagers. I'm like, oh, like these hot takes that these teenagers, like I was 18 and like when Facebook was brand new, and now I'm in my 30s and looking at what these teenagers are saying on Facebook. I'm like, oh, like I've gone through this before, but like you need to figure that out for yourself. So I think each generation is maybe having a little bit more of a roadmap and capacity that it's like I think there's still a lot of work to be done where I know I haven't always behaved perfectly and I've gotten more caught up in the drama, and like it's had to be like a constant refrain in our household through COVID, like what do we have Like, it's like I was talking about having to challenge that elder in the ceremony a bit, and ultimately, like, I got through the initiation process. Like, maybe that was like a beneficial conflict spot, but like, I crashed a pride ceremony at the beginning of the month and called the organizer a white supremacist, and then like wives of police officers were crying in Sioux Lookout, and like complaints were made to our employers, and it was a big hot mess because I jumped to frame my perfect politics before I thought about the potential repercussions in a small town, and it didn't impact me, it impacted other people too.
I love how you and Aaron think you're like old grandparents because you're 30.
It's because I have a lot of 16-year-olds and we spend a lot of time on our foam roller. But it's, yeah, like, I'm the middle-aged millennial that grew up on Facebook, where for me, like, when I was accepted to university in 2006, like, Facebook was the time when you had a university email address to be allowed to make a Facebook account. So like, that was our rites of passage, like graduating high school and getting a Facebook account. And now I'm like the time traveler, like looking back at 2006, and I'll be like, don't go there, it's a trap. But I know we're still quite youthful, and I still get quite, I get pegged in with the youth in town quite frequently too, but I still know that I'm twice their age, so it gives me a certain perspective.
Manu, anything else to add?
I would like to do Ulua Ekevilina Akealoha as a mahalo to you, Alex, as a mahalo to you, Leanne, as a mahalo to you, Melody, because I'm just grateful. I've never been in a conversation like this, and it's brought out some lovely, very difficult memories, and I'm still here to actually keep the light alive for this type of conversation in Hawaii, so that we can actually grow and evolve. But you know, when aloha is the it's not our philosophy, it's not our religion, it's our culture. It's, you know, I think because geography shapes your epistemology, I think our geography plays a role in this. So there's no better or worse in this. There's only a shared sense of collaboration that I feel, because this did not come easily, but it is definitely lodged in my heart forever. So this means loving is the practice of an awake mind. And now I actually feel it means loving is the expression of spirit, because I've heard of some Anishinaabe speakers speak of spirit and its connection to love. And I truly get that that's a synonym for loving, and spirit are synonyms. So I do it 5 times because it's the amount, the number of healing for us in Hawaii. Ulua e kevelina ke alu. Ulua e kevelina age aloha. Ulua e kevelina age aloha. Ulua e kevelina ake aloha. Ulua e kevelina ake Mahalo I kia kua na kinia kua na uma kua na kupuna kia wahi puna hele. Mahalo nui no kia hui, mahalo nui no kia kupai na na wahina e mana, na wahina e mana ahe ahe. Nui ke aloha e ku'u mahoa. Much gratitude for this time shared with you. Absolutely. Mahalo nui for this opportunity, Leanne and Alex. I'm glad you guys are working together. And Melody, you rock, girl. You rock. Congratulations on this kaupapa. It's really been special. Leanne, it's so good to see you. Totally. Alex, I love and adore you.
Miigwech, Manu. And yes, my gratitude to everybody for participating in this.